Hey guys, what's going on? Super Rugby Round 9 is in the books. Here are all the results from the weekend. Couple of big surprises there. We're going to break down every single game. Let's get to it. So, for me, I was very curious about Hurricanes versus Crusaders. The Crusaders did beat the Canes in round 1 this year. That was in Christchurch, so you started thinking, well, maybe the result could get reversed. It's in Wellington this week. More All Blacks are playing for the Hurricanes. Will that make a difference? Well, it certainly seemed to. At first, the Hurricanes probably had the better of the first 10 minutes, and then Umaga Jensen on his 50th game scored a try, and it looked pretty promising. From there, the Crusaders just grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck. They did the basics better. A guy I kept looking at was Cullen Grace. Not a rock star, but the glue that sort of holds that loose forward mix together. Very good in the rolling mauls. Literally connects all the players, does the basics well. And it was graft like that that allowed Scott Barrett to shine. And we've been critical of Barrett in the comments section lately. I don't think he's reading the comments section of this YouTube channel. I don't even think he's paying much mind to the media white noise questioning his form. But this guy's a professional. He knows, and he admitted that he hasn't been near his peak form. I'm sure he and Rob Penny sat down and, in as many words, agreed, time to lift the game. Well, he did that this week. He answered his critics. He was very good in the set piece, but he was rampaging around the field. He was breaking the line. He was offloading well. You know he's confident when he's adding those deft little touches to his game. And it reminded me of the Scott Barrett who debuted against Ireland and Chicago in 2016. I was there that fateful day the All Blacks lost, but he was a shining light. He really stood out on the field. That was how I felt watching this game. Now, even if you're on the Ardie Savea as All Black captain bandwagon, which frankly is a bandwagon I find myself getting onto more every week, even if you want Ardie to captain the ABs, we all know as Kiwis, Scott Barrett needs to be in good form. He's obviously one of the premier locks, most experienced. That was heartening to see him perform well out there. Also got to give a shout out to Noah Hotham. I think I talk about him every week. At this point in time, he is my third halfback in the All Blacks behind Cam Roigard and Cortez Ratama. But let me know what you think. Do you think someone else should be that third choice scrum half for the ABs? Very curious about that position. Now, look, the other factor that really skewed this in favor of the Red and Blacks was defense. Defense wins championships. A few weeks back, I really felt a lift in intensity from the Crusaders. And it was the D. It was against the Blues at Eden Park. The D just went to a different level. Obviously, that went away against Moana Pasifika in a very off-color game. But it was back against the Drua, and it was back in this game against the Hurricanes. They held off the Canes, who were very strong finishing at the end. And grit, attitude. Crusaders are back to number 1 on the ladder after that. So it's looking like business as usual. More and more, that Moana Pasifika game looks like a blip. Well, speaking of blips, the Chiefs really had a howler of a game in Sydney. 21 points to 14. Looks pretty tight, and yet it was kind of one of those games where it never looked like the Waratahs were going to lose. And I think that one man stood out, and that was Joseph Suali'i playing at fullback. Now, a star was already born last year at Twickenham against England when Suali'i was wearing a Wallabies jersey. He was outstanding. I think this was his star-making Super Rugby performance. He's had good performances, but this was a game where it looked like boys against men sometimes when he was on the charge. He must have beaten or carried over 5 or 6 Chiefs defenders to score a try early on. Just wow. And the Chiefs defense has been gnarly this year, so it looked quite porous in Sydney. I always think the defense is a barometer of attitude. Don't think the heads were right with the Chiefs this week. I think they simply hit the wall. Not to make excuses, they were outplayed, they were outpassioned, they were clearly second best. But it's interesting, even in the last couple of years when the Chiefs have made it all the way to the grand final, they've tripped up against the Reds, for instance. They beat the Reds last week, but this almost felt like that rough night that's going to happen every so often to even the top teams. And it was just the perfect storm because the Waratahs were snapping back from their own troubles. Like, let's not forget, the Hurricanes beat the Tars 57 points to 10 in Wellington. Moana Pasifika trampled them in the second half for an historic victory last week down on the North Shore of Auckland. So the Tars needed to step back, step up, assert themselves. They did that. They did that. They did that very well. From Angus Bell to Suali'i, every player in between, they were really dominant. So congrats to the Tars. Not sure what that means. Not sure that I would pick anyone but the Chiefs to win a rematch if it happened in Waikato. But a bad night at the office for the Chiefs, a great night for the Tars. Well, it was not a great night for Moana Pasifika. This was the game we were all excited about. Sort of like a Battle of Auckland, you could say, because Moana Pasifika, of course, are stationed on the North Shore of Auckland. That's where their stadium is. But guys, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of deep analysis required in this game. Very simply, the Blues pack rolled up their sleeves and steamrolled Moana Pasifika in the first half. The pick and go was back to that level of their championship run last year. The set piece looked better. They were just absolutely formidable. They decided to take the direct route. They realized if they get into a kicking, counter-attacking kind of duel with Moana Pasifika, Kyron Taimoifalau, William Havili, letting those boys run back into space, they're doomed. They know what these guys can do. And they just didn't let that happen. They tightened up the game. And you just felt like this was the game where Moana Pasifika maybe hit the wall a little bit after two huge performances, two historic wins back-to-back. Tanks looked a little bit empty. Not so for Adi Savia, who just is always phenomenal and was outstanding. But in general, this felt like Moana Pasifika was running into a buzzsaw. And maybe that was a turnaround performance for the Blues last week against the Canes, winning by a point. They certainly look so much better with Finlay Christie and Beauden Barrett running the show at 9 and 10. You saw nice touches from Rieko Ioane. You saw Mark Talea score. You saw Caleb Clark really damaging the gain line. This was everything you wanted to see if you were an Auckland fan. And the only disappointment for me was that it really wasn't that tight. You know, a little late flurry from Moana Pasifika. They did look better with Pellegrini running around at, playmaker. He was kind of still interchanging at playmaker with the starting 10 this week, Garden Bishop. And look, I understand they had to give Pellegrini a break. All of the teams have to do it at some point. You know, Damien McKenzie, he had to make way for Jacob to get some minutes for the Chiefs at 10 this week. You had Taha Kemara having a week off so James O'Connor could start for the Crusaders. Yeah, like you can't just expect these guys to start every single game. But Pellegrini is the man in that jersey, and they didn't look as assured with him sitting on the bench in the first half. So a tough loss for Moana Pasifika, beaten up front, beaten at the basics, couldn't quite muster the razzle-dazzle to pull it back because the Blues were just in no mood to lose that game. Their defense was much tighter. They were much more cohesive. Really, really good return to form for the Blues. And Beauden Barrett is just in sensational form right now. Shouldn't be surprising given his accolades, given he just became the second highest point scorer in Super Rugby history, second only to Dan Carter. He jumped ahead of Mornay Steyn, that famous player from the Bulls and the Springboks. I'm sure you guys all remember fondly, or not so fondly if you're not a South African, but a great player. But yeah, man, I mean, Barrett is just reigniting that conversation about who should be the All Blacks number 10. Should it be D-Mac? Should it be Beauden Barrett? It's good to have that debate. I'm glad we're having that debate. We'll see where the Blues go from here. I'd love to know your thoughts. You know, with the last couple of weeks, an anomaly? Are the Blues going to go back to their losing ways, or do you actually think they've turned the corner? Let me know. All right, well, one result I was happy with was the Highlanders beat the Drua down in Dunedin. They needed that one, and you'll be pleased to see that midfield combination of Thomas Umaga-Jensen and Tavatavanawai tearing it up. You'll be very happy with that if you're a Highlanders fan. But I'm guessing that you'll be even more happy with the forward pack. Ethan de Groot, Fabian Holland, as expected, despite a couple of errors, brought some real starch to the forward pack. And that has been the Achilles heel for this team. Let's not forget, I believe it was 5 scrum penalties against the Reds that just sunk their hopes at home a few weeks back. Similar issues against the Brumbies. Beaten up front, beaten at scrum time. That wounds the pride of these Southern boys. But this restored some pride. The pick and go was good. The set piece was better. They were getting traction with the rolling maul. They were weaponizing their forward pack again. So we haven't seen that in a few weeks. You'll be very, very pleased about that. Probably above anything else if you're from Landers country. Not that the Drua are a good touring team, okay? I mean, don't get me wrong. The opposition perhaps was questionable. Great team at home. They don't have the best touring record. That's just statistical fact. Regardless, I think the Highlanders lifted internally, irrespective of the opposition. I think they lifted. I think they played a lot better. And a few weeks back, I said, look, this is a good team. It's just they're short of 1 or 2 X-Factor players. Well, now with Cameron Miller back at 10, finding his footing again, but great young pivot, good goal kicker. With him out there, I feel better. Caleb Tangitau, Tavatava Nawai. There is X-Factor. So if all these boys that were playing yesterday can stay healthy and fit, they could push for a spot in the top 6. I still think they're just honestly going to fall short. I'm not sure how much noise they would make, even if they do get into the playoffs, but much better result here. Well, for me, maybe the biggest shocker was actually the Reds going down at home to the Brumbies. This was a really dominant performance from ACT, and yeah, they just muscled up. They beat the Reds up front, which was quite surprising. Definitely a seesaw game. It felt in the balance for much of it, but the Brumbies sort of ran away with it at the end. And just excellent work from Ryan Lonergan at 9. I believe he might have been the man of the match. Would have been an appropriate accolade, if so, because he was sniping, he was cutting them up. The game management was good. Smart play from the Brumbies. And it's interesting, like no Australian team has totally asserted themselves. They've all been better. I mean, the top 6 invariably is just laden with Aussie teams. All 4 of them are pretty much in there every time I look at the ladder. But they keep kind of leapfrogging each other. There's no clear dominant force. We thought it was the Reds a few weeks back. Then they dropped that game to the Chiefs. Now the Reds have dropped this game. The Waratahs we thought were absolutely dismal. Well, then they roar back and beat the Chiefs, who are many people's favorites to win it all, including mine. So no real clear Aussie side standing out anymore. Based on this weekend's form, it's the Brumbies and the Waratahs. But we'll see what happens in round 10. And I will be back with you next week to preview that round. Meanwhile, like and subscribe for more rugby analysis. And let's chat in the comments. I'm going to be reading them all and responding. Let's get to it there, guys. Lots to talk about. Catch you for another one real soon. Take it easy. Bye for now.